Hi, I'm Lisa Fletcher, and you're in the stream. Today, has the January 25th revolution failed Egypt's Christians? We examine the roots of sectarianism in post-Mubarak Egypt and what some activists are doing to fight religious discrimination. Our digital producer, Malika Bilal, is here going through all of your live interaction. Malika, the January 25th uprising reduced some of the tensions between Muslims and Christians, but now we're seeing that other minorities and Coptic Christians are really being affected in a more dramatic way than really we saw perhaps even during Mubarak's regime.
Right, definitely. And then people are definitely saying that. Now, Egyptians have always been social media savvy, so it was no surprise that they take these issues, the issues of religion and sectarianism, and create an online campaign like this one, which we reported on a few days ago. None of Your Business campaign covers religion on national ID cards. We're going to talk to one of the creators of that campaign in our hangout later today, but of course, this is a live conversation, so if you want to get in on that, we want to hear from you. Tweet us with the hashtag AJStream.
To Malika's right is Paul Cedra. He's an associate professor of history at Simon Fraser University. Paul, thanks for being here.
It's great to be here.
We're glad to have you. I'd also like to welcome a number of Egyptian activists who are in our Google Plus Hangout. They'll be sharing their comments and questions with us momentarily. And of course, any one of you can be in one of our Hangouts. Just make sure you add us to your circles. Go to that link right there at the bottom of your screen.
Hi, I'm Shambhavi and I'm a student of Delhi University and I'm in the stream.
Sectarian violence in Egypt has claimed the lives of nearly 60 Coptic Christians and several Muslims over the last 2 years. Since the overthrow of former President Hosni Mubarak, religious tensions have been on the rise. Some estimate an average of 2 Coptic Christians are killed and 18 are injured each month. The latest incident, which took the life of one person and injured more than 80, happened earlier this month. It was in front of Cairo's St. Mark Cathedral. That is the seat of the Coptic Orthodox Pope and a symbol of Egypt's Christian community. Witnesses say mourners that were holding funeral prayers for 4 Christians killed in a previous incident were attacked by a mob of men who threw rocks and Molotov cocktails as they exited the cathedral. The mourners responded by throwing rocks back. State police fired tear gas into the cathedral compound in an attempt to quell the unrest. At least 4 Coptic activists were later arrested in connection with the St. Mark's Cathedral clashes. The Coptic Maspera Youth Union condemned the arrests, calling it an escalation against Christian youth. President Morsi denounced the attack, describing it as an attack on him personally. However, critics say the government not only fails to acknowledge rising tensions, but denies that it's a problem altogether. The head of the Coptic Church, Pope Tewodros II, appealed for calm and strongly condemned Morsi for what he called negligence and failure to properly deal with the sectarian clashes north of Cairo. So with rising tensions between Egyptian Muslims and Christians, what are the root causes for sectarianism in post-Mubarak Egypt? And are there ways to overcome religious discrimination? To help us answer some of these questions, we are also joined via Skype from Alexandria by Muhammad Sudan, the Foreign Relations Secretary for the Freedom and Justice Party. Muhammad, welcome to the stream.
Thank you. Welcome you. Thank you.
So, Paul, I want to start with you. Sects have always existed in Egypt, but have the tensions always escalated to this level?
Not always. I mean, really, if sectarianism is a modern phenomenon in Egypt, there are claims that are often made to the effect that Copts and Muslims have lived together in Egypt for centuries. And
you say claims. Is that not true?
Well, it is true. I mean, it's but there are claims that are made in the current context that are intended to advance particular political agendas. And so, in modern times, we've seen an interesting trajectory for sectarianism in Egypt. I mean, since the 1970s, I would argue at least, we've seen a rise in sectarianism, which I think one can attribute to a couple of causes. The first is that in the 1970s, then President Sadat of Egypt, used Islamism as a means by which to consolidate his own power. as against that of his predecessor, Gamal Abdel Nasser, who was much more of a secularist, who wasn't particularly interested in Islam per se as a strategy of rule. Whereas Sadat explicitly called himself the believer president, really wanted to associate himself with Islam as a political idiom, a language in Egypt, and so promoted Islamism and the Islamization of Egyptian society. At the same time, we also see the growth, a massive growth in the Coptic Church as an institution. We see the expansion of social services within the Coptic Church.
And does that expansion create tension?
Well, I mean, with these twin processes happening, this Islamization of Egyptian society, sort of begun by Sadat, and the growth of the bureaucracy and the social services of the Coptic Orthodox Church, there are tensions that emerge in Egypt. We sort of see the emergence of what one might call two solitudes. A tendency on the part of the two religious communities to associate only amongst themselves. And that's certainly, I think, promoted much of the sectarianism that we see in Egyptian society today.
And speaking of the sectarianism, well, Eskandar, I want to bring you in. Talk about how things are going post-Mubarak. What kinds of discrimination are you facing?
I think it's really important to point out that there are two types of sectarianism that we're dealing with, and one of them is the people, and the other one is from the state. And of course, from the people's perspective, this has grown, but what's really important to focus on is the sectarianism of the state. And we see state institutions becoming more and more sectarian, and clamping down more on minorities, and no steps have been taken to address that. The kind of sectarianism I'm talking about from the state is, for example, let's take the incident which led to the deaths of Christians in Al-Khusus, where their funerals were being held in the cathedral. The police failed to protect the Christians and the church, and not only that. Let's take electricity was cut off from everywhere else but the church, making it a target. And when Christians were injured, the hospitals did not take in Christians. A lot of the hospitals did not take in the Christians. So what you have here is the most important part is that the state is contributing to sectarianism rather than addressing it, and therefore in society sectarianism will be encouraged, and it will continue.
Mohammed Sudan, I want you to respond to that. Is the state contributing to sectarian violence, if by at the least just simply doing nothing?
Actually, let me come back a little bit for the main points, which is just your guest is saying that the state sectarianism. I believe we suffering, both Muslims and Christians, in the era of Mubarak, from discrimination and sectarianism, both for Muslims, especially the Muslim Brotherhood, and also the Christian. Let me just remind my friend that the big event in Alexandria, which is a church called Al-Qiddisin, that was happened by the security police, not by the Muslims. This kind of attack and bombing the church, and in the era of the revolution.
Mohammed, I want to interrupt you just a second, because police are really an extension of the government, and the government sets the tone and it sets the politics. So wasn't it the government's responsibility to step in there?
No, the police was there. It was just phenomenal, and the police was there, not very close to the church, as far as I know. But what happened that we found out some was walking in the funeral, and then went to narrow roads, and they start to break a lot of cars, the windshield of the cars, and they make some kind of chaos in the street. After this, then everything was not under the control. But the problem is that we found out a lot of Christians mount in the roof of the church in Al Abbasiyah, and they started to shoot. Some people were clashing, I don't know, their neighborhoods or somebody else, and then the police came in and to shoot a tear gas against the people who has guns in the roof of the church.
Well, we were
This
just
is
looking
the
at video,
major
though, of
problem.
people with guns on the ground, people with Molotov cocktails, people with guns on the ground, people throwing rocks. We know 4 Coptic Christians were arrested for sure. How many of those on the ground
Muslims also, and a lot
were
of Muslims
arrested?
being captured, and a lot of Christians, both. But who started this in El Khusus? There was a couple guys of Christian guys. They just drew a very bad walls, and they drew the cross in the wall of Al Azhar Institute in the Al Khusus. This is the sparkle, actually, which happened in Al Khusus. Anyway, we are sad because of the and that time it was just a sad time. Everybody was sad because of we lost Egyptians, which they belong to the Muslims or belong to the Christians. This is sad for us. This is sad for the Egyptian citizens. And
Well,
the
Secretary,
clashes.
Secretary Mohammed, I want to get in here because our community is responding. We have a tweet here from Maya who talks about the general, feeling of Copts in Egypt. Maya says one example is that the treatment we Copts get at government offices once they see an ID stating the religion. So I went on to ask her what happens when they see that ID. She says a non-religious guy won't speak with me at the Ministry of Education because my necklace had a cross. He said the first you have to remove that thing. Now, Wa'il, in our hangout, I know that you have a response and you face some of these daily injustices. You recently wrote an article, and I pulled it up here on my screen, and you said, what do you do when every state institution is against you? What do you do when the prayers you've relied on for a very long time are not enough anymore? What do you do when every leadership has let you down? Who do you turn to? Have you found an answer to that, Wa'il?
I think the answer is you turn to the people. That's the only answer, and you look within yourself because the state institutions and the legal routes written by those who oppress you won't work. There's no exact answer there, but as a government representative right now pointed out, it was the Christians who started it. So I mean I rest my case. If this is the response of the FJP to something that has happened, it was their fault. They started it. Then how can you turn to them for any solutions?
Paul, did the revolution make things worse for Copts? Was it better under Mubarak?
Well, no. I mean, I think certainly any time of instability is going to be a time of uncertainty for minorities within a country like Egypt. Whenever you create a situation of instability, as necessarily the revolution did by overhauling the political structure and so forth, minorities like the Copts, like the Shia minority in Egypt and so forth, they're going to feel threatened by the possibility that the existing arrangements for dealing with them might be changed. And of course, Copts have been under pressure for many, many years. I mean, as was said by Well and others, I mean, the sort of discrimination that Copts face in everyday life is palpable. And ever since the 1970s, we've seen sectarianism increase in Egypt. It's become more and more prevalent in public discourse, in the newspapers, in the state media. And that's a disturbing development. I mean,
Paul, it's interesting that you said that because Tom is kind of picking up on what you just said. He says Copts have faced marginalization, discrimination, hatred in Egypt for at least the past 70 years. Can the recent events really be laid at the feet of the post-Mubarak revolution, or is this business as usual?
Yeah, what's so disturbing I find about the current period in Egypt is, in the wake of the revolution, I really expected there to be a serious discussion about citizenship, about what might change in terms of definitions of Egyptianness. And that discussion has not happened, even with the passage of the new constitution. Really, one could hardly call it the passage. I mean, it was the ramming through of a new constitution by a brotherhood-dominated assembly, and there was no real discussion among Copts and Muslims, among all Egyptians, about new definitions of Egyptianness in the wake of the revolution.
Speaking of that, people would argue, and Wael, I want you to jump in here, and then we'll go to the Foreign Relations Secretary. How about that new constitution? Is that making it more difficult for the Copts?
Yes, when you have a constitution where the church has withdrawn because it's being kept out of the discussion, and one person going in and saying, a Muslim is saying, I am a representative of the Coptic Church, then this is a real issue that we have. And I think the constitution does not grant enough rights to most minorities anyway, not just Copts. Copts are the most palpable, example of this. But it's certainly not a great constitution for minorities.
Foreign Relations Secretary Mohammed Sudan, I want to get your take on that. The new constitution, it seems like, at least when you're talking to Coptic Christians, that it doesn't lead to national unity. Would you beg to differ?
Hello?
Mr. Secretary, can you hear me?
Yes. Say it again, please.
The new constitution, Copts are arguing that it doesn't help them. It, in fact, makes things worse and makes them more isolated. How does that hold up against Morsi wanting to have national unity?
One article, just to give me one article, discriminate them or not giving them their rights, comparing with the 1974 constitution, the former one. And they were participating. They are working to write the constitution. A lot of press were there working with the Constitution Assembly. They are writing together. At least they signed for 90% from all the article of the Constitution.
Is that square?
No, that's not true, unfortunately. Unfortunately, that's inaccurate because the church representatives, as well said, essentially all of the Copts, and indeed a great many Muslims, withdrew from the Constituent Assembly because they were not happy with how the Constituent Assembly was being run. And if one looks at the text of the document itself, it's almost, at least to my mind, a return to the 19th century in terms of dealing with issues of citizenship. For instance, Article 3 grants the Coptic Orthodox Church a massive increase in power over the everyday lives of individual Copts. Now, in a sense, that's a good thing for the church insofar as it protects church affairs and allows the church to have a significant role in the lives of Christians. But for, let's say, those Copts who don't affiliate themselves strongly with the church, who may not be religious, affording such power to the church is not particularly good for them. I mean, particularly when it comes to issues like marriage, divorce, inheritance, which are under the Constitution vouchsafed exclusively to the power of the church hierarchy.
Well, Bishoy, in our hangout, coming to us also over the phone, I want to go to you for that because, you've said earlier that you told our producers earlier before the show that you're not necessarily finding the leadership within the church and you're not finding it in the government. We have a Facebook comment here from Gigi who says Egypt is in desperate need of courageous leadership that can address these prejudices. Failed leaders include not just those who incite hatred, but those who don't speak out forcefully against it. So were you feeling the same things when you decided to form the Maspero Youth Union?
Yeah, this is why we are in Maspero Youth Union. We are trying to have a voice for Christians, and what Mr. Sudan said, it's the same what we were hearing from Mubarak regime, that there was a priestess in the negotiation, there was a priestess in the Constitution Council. They can represent you in your demands, your rights. This is not right. They can't represent us, actually. You are choosing who's easy to follow your plan. If you were with the revolution, your speech is gonna be different from Mubarak. You're gonna choose who's representing us in the Constitution. Not only talking about the Constitution, only what happened in the cathedral. What you said is the same. The words post, and we are the same under discrimination. This is wrong. What happened in the cathedral, what happened in Naga Hammadi, what happened in Alexandria 2011. This is the same speech we hear now after what happened in the cathedral. We heard in Alexandria and Naga Hammadi. You're saying that the police were into to make it to make a line between Christian and Muslim. Actually, it wasn't between Christian and Muslim. It was between the church and the regime. The policemen of your regime were attacking us in the cathedral. Not only the policemen and your thugs. Let me give you some names. Do you know Samir Farha?
Secretary Mohammed, I want you to respond to what Bishoy was saying, but I also want to give you a tweet, in support of the Muslim Brotherhood, because of course not all of our followers are critical. Raheel says, Article 45 of the Egyptian Constitution extends the freedom of religion to the 3 Abrahamic religions. Secretary, I'd like your thoughts on what Bishoy said, but also on this criticism and the back and forth on the Constitution and the articles within it.
Actually, I never feel. I've read the Constitution, the existing one. I don't feel never that there's no any kind of sectarian or the discrimination against any one of the Egyptian citizenship. The Christian we consider as a Muslims, or actually as a Muslim Brotherhood, that all the Christians in Egypt are in the same way from the Egyptian people. We have a very good relationship with them. They are my neighbors. We live together. We go to school together. We go to university together. We work together. The police is the police. If we talk about the police in the street, then if there is any kind of riot or chaos, then they treat all together. I just remind Mr. Bishoy that in the era of the revolution, we were, as a Muslim Brotherhood, protect all the churches here in Alexandria and all over of Egypt, and they should remind that. And they were protecting us also while we are praying in the Tahrir Square.
Mr. Secretary, I'm going to have to stop you there because we're out of time, but we will continue this discussion in our online post show. We're also going to bring in one guest that you have yet to hear from, who started a campaign to cover up the religious identity of Egyptians. We're going to tell you why, but first, Malika has a couple other stories that we're following.
Condemned to a dress. Kurdish men in Iran have started a cross-dressing campaign called Kurdish Men for Equality in order to communicate one simple message: being a woman is nothing to be ashamed of. The page was created after a local court judge reportedly ordered a man convicted of domestic abuse to wear women's clothing as a form of public humiliation. Some men called the ruling demeaning to women and posted photos like this. And this side reads, "Disgracing Kurdish women is disgracing an international community. Women are mothers, sisters, and life partners." In another post that garnered more than 500 shares, a man wrote, "Hoping for the day when sexuality and gender will not be a way of evaluating humanity." Our next leads from Uganda, where President Museveni has come under fire for awarding a local youth group a sack of cash. This video from NTV Uganda shows Museveni handing a bag reportedly containing about $100,000 to the Busoga Youth Forum, along with a minibus, a truck, and 15 motorcycles. Ugandans on Twitter were less than thrilled with the president's donation to a group located in an area where support for him has been low. Using the hashtag #SackOfMoney, Mulamizi asked, why is Museveni spending money willy-nilly when some public employees go without pay for months? But this tweet summed up the criticism. Saddest thing about the crowd ululating when Museveni handed over the sack of money, they don't realize it's theirs to begin with. And lastly, the Associated Press Twitter account was hacked briefly on Tuesday, causing both panic and ridicule online. The hackers managed to tweet the following false breaking news report: 2 explosions in the White House and Barack Obama is injured. The news outlet Russia Today quoted the AP in this tweet, which has since been deleted. And while the AP has suspended all of its Twitter accounts, it wasn't able to stop hysteria from spreading outside Twitter. Immediately after the tweet was sent, the Dow Jones Industrial Average plummeted more than 100 points in 2 minutes. Many were surprised by the ability of a single tweet to have this kind of effect. Anthony writes, "The world is now watching, and many will no doubt devise ways to manipulate markets via social media." For more on both those stories, head over to stream.aljazeera.com. Lisa?
All right, stay with us. The Post Show is next at stream.aljazeera.com. On Wednesday's program, more than half of the detainees at Guantanamo Bay are now on a hunger strike. We'll examine debate around indefinite detention by the U.S. military. Until then, we'll see you online. Welcome to the Online Post Show. We're going to pick up where we left off. Well, Eskandar, I want to go to you. We were talking about the new Egyptian constitution, and does that make life more inequitable for Coptic Christians?
Yes, the new constitution places great weight on Sharia, even more so than the past one. Article 219, it claims that the sources are from Sharia and what the Sharia says. But also important to remember that the real problem is that the laws were put to Al-Azhar, which is a Muslim institution, to get their consultation. And I think in that aspect of it means that Christians will not have a great say about even the laws that govern both Muslims and Christians. That sort of discrimination is there. But also, more importantly, elsewhere in the Constitution, equality is not emphasized, in little tiny bit, especially that there is a problem, with minorities. So I think overall, this idea leaning towards Muslim interpretation, together with not ensuring that their citizenship, is a real problem and is going to be a real problem for Copts in the future.
Lama, I want to switch gears here and go to you for a moment. You and a woman named Sarah Carr decided to launch a campaign called the None of Your Business campaign, and you were advocating covering up a section of the national identity card that states your religion. Tell us a little bit about that, why you did it, how it's going, how it's been received.
Hi. Well, I think what happened in this program is pretty much a good indication of why one would be compelled to do that. From the very beginning, we've been hearing Muslim, Christians, Christian, Muslims, and so on, with no room for a very simple concept which is sometimes useful, which is being a citizen, just the concept of citizenship. I'm an Egyptian, and I'm an Egyptian before being anything else. And what comes next is actually a very personal matter. Now, the interference of the state, even in my ID card, which is an official public document which can be asked in any sort of context, it is written to which creed I belong to, regardless, by the way, if I do believe in this creed or if it was my choice. So the interference of the state is just, in the ID card, is just a sign of how much the state is interfering in labeling people, and actually in dividing people, in making people different rather than equal. And I think the role of the state is to always cater for equality in front of the law, in front of jobs, in front of opportunities, etc., which is absolutely not the case. And the constitution that we've been discussing earlier is really making things worse and worse. You said in the very beginning of the program whether the 5th of January revolution had failed Christians. It's not at all about Christians. It's about Egyptians. It's about Egyptians, whatever they may be, who have been divided using the religious, sometimes the religious issue. And the military did that very well during the year of transition. And now the Muslim Brotherhood is giving another push. So this is why we think it's enough and that a debate should be started. And to do that, I covered my ID and I put my blood type instead of my religion.
I'm sorry, Malika.
Excuse me.
I just have one follow-up for you. Do you think younger people are more open to addressing these problems?
I wouldn't want to speculate, but what I can remember of the 18 days of this revolution and what came after is that people on the street, one of the things that they were really happy about is to become citizens again and to forget about these things. And so, yes, there were young people, there were old people, but I wouldn't risk myself at categorizing this as a young people's issue.
Well, Wael, I want to go to you with a tweet here from Saif Malik. He says, Morsi has introduced and called upon legislation and action to protect them. So we have heard statements coming from the government, indicating that the government is going to do more. Do you believe them, and is that enough for you?
My question would be, if you were a sectarian government and if you're using the English language, what would you say other than that? Or even the Arabic language? There is nothing except words that protect you from acts of sectarianism, and they are using words. The problem is there's no real action. So even if Morsi says an attack on a cathedral is like an attack on me personally, or if he says steps will be taken to address it, it's more of the same that we've heard from other regimes, so I don't think it matters much, except in rhetoric.
Hey, Wael, I got sent this newspaper article from Today, Daily News in Egypt, just a few minutes ago, and it's announcing a panel discussion that's supposed to form a National Council for Justice and Equity, and it's led by the assistant to President Morsi. It has representatives from the Orthodox Church, political parties, civil society, the Center for Islamic Learning. Is that a positive step? Do you think this is something you can look to as a move in the right direction?
No, I think it's, to be very, very honest, it's just more of the same. More of idle rhetoric that means really nothing. If we want the sectarian issue to be addressed, we have to focus on justice. And so all these talks and will mean really nothing. It was going to be, just to appease people and to pretend as if something is happening. But nothing good can come out of it. I don't think so.
Bishoy, these clashes probably are not going to end anytime soon. How do you go about preventing them? What move do you advise members of Maspero Youth Union to take?
Actually, the main move is to remove the main reason of the suffering of Christians, and not only Christians, all the minorities in Egypt. And the big reason is that the terrorists is taking over in Egypt now. The big move is to go against and struggle against this regime to remove it. This is the big move we are trying to do now. And also to participate with the other activists as Egyptian in the social work in Egypt, and to have a secular voice, not a spiritual voice, as they're trying to do a council whose church is a member and representing the Christian. The church cannot represent Christians in politics. This is what we say to Muhammad al-Baltagi in a conference in Majlis al-Shura while they were listening to the opinions about the constitution. We said to them, don't be like Mubarak regime. Church doesn't represent us. He said that this is what we can deal with. We can deal with you. This is the mind who taking over in Egypt and had the power. The move now is to remove them from the top of Egypt.
Secretary Sudan, I'd like you to respond to that and also tell us what's the government willing to do at this point? How are you going to meet in the middle?
I think that the way in which Dr. Morsi is handling the trading and dealing with all the Egyptian people, he never ever make some kind of discrimination against or separate the Egyptian people for Christians and Muslims or even Jewish people. The way which Dr. Morsi is dealing with that, all the Egyptians are the same. They have the same rights, the same human rights. There's no any kind of discrimination. This is the way he was always using it. And what happened in the event of Al Khusus, this is even a sectarian reasons or something like this, but it's some kind of disorder, as it happened before in the era of Mubarak many times, and the regime itself was causing this kind of sectarian disorder. But I think it's different. And about the Constitution also.
I'm going to stop you there, Mr. Secretary. We're about out of time. Paul, I want to give you the last word. We've got about 30, 45 seconds left.
Well, I think that, what this conversation indicates is that there really has to be a serious discussion about citizenship in Egypt, and that hasn't happened yet. Surprisingly enough, in the wake of the January 25th revolution, we haven't had a serious discussion about legal equality for Christians and Muslims, and for those of no faith, of different faiths. And so really what I find so promising about Alam Wasif's campaign and Sarah Carr's campaign having to do with removing indications of religious affiliation from ID cards is that it's getting that discussion going, a serious discussion about citizenship, so that we can move ahead and move beyond these binaries of Christian and Muslim to a new understanding of what citizenship in Egypt might be about in the future.
Well said, sir. Thank you so much for joining us. Thanks to all of our guests today. Now, on Wednesday's program, more than half of the detainees at Guantanamo Bay are now on a hunger strike. We're going to examine the debate around indefinite detention by the U.S. military. Send us your thoughts and your questions on that. Until then, we'll see you online.